All right, well, thanks for tuning in. I'm joined today by Matt Schmidt. He is a fellow Nebraskan, but we actually didn't meet here in Nebraska. We didn't meet till we had both moved to South Carolina to go to Southern Evangelical Seminary. We both had a passion to serve others and study apologetics, and that's where we met. And since then, I've moved back to the great state of Nebraska, but Matt is still stuck in the Carolinas, but he's back here visiting family for a few days, a week.
Yep, roughly
a week. And he has started a new ministry that I'm really excited about, and so I thought I'd have him on and just let you guys be aware of what he's doing, how he's serving others, and how he can serve you and your church. So I thought for the first thing, Matt, we could just start by giving folks a little bit about your background and how you became a Christian, how you got involved with this stuff.
Right. Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different background, I'd say, than a lot of people in that my childhood, I did have so much church exposure, had great parents, great family, really great family values, but didn't have as much church exposure. We stopped going when I was around 12, but I had a lot of questions, even starting then, that most Christians didn't know how to answer. Well, really any that I had talked to about how can we know Christianity is true. And so even as an early teenager, I was asking those kind of questions and not really getting answers. And so by the time I was probably 17, for sure, I would have called myself an atheist. Not an angry militant, everybody needs to be an atheist, but I just thought there aren't good reasons to believe Christianity is true, and if there's not a good reason, then I'm not going to. I had a good family, did well in sports, did well in school, so I was just satisfied with life. Thankfully, I was that inquisitiveness that led me to ask all those questions about Christianity didn't stop. And so through probably my first 3 years of college, roughly, I continued to ask questions about things like how did the universe come into existence? And I had a very strong sense of objective morality, again, coming from being raised in a really good family, being taught good values. But how do we ground this? I couldn't ground it on atheism. At best, I could get most people should be moral most of the time for society to function well. But I couldn't say...
And you were going to the University of Nebraska here? Or?
Yeah, I was going to the University of Nebraska this time. I started out, did a year at Iowa State in engineering, got out of engineering, came back to Nebraska to get in-state tuition. And this would have been really culminating in my first few years here back in Nebraska at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And so eventually went from atheism to deism without really even knowing that was a thing, probably, but just, okay, there has to be something behind what caused the universe to begin to exist. And then that made sense out of how do I have this strong sense of objective morality. And I knew enough about Jesus from what I had gotten in church and just the general culture that I knew even other religions saw Jesus as the ideal of morality, and morality was a big thing for me. I thought I was more moral than I actually was at the time, but I thought, okay, so Christianity makes the most sense out of all of these. As far as when I got to the point that I would have been a theist, though I don't know that I would have known to use that term, I thought, okay, well, if there's a personal God behind the universe and he created us for a reason, then he would be able to tell us what that is in some way. And so religion seemed to be the only place you could find that. Philosophy, though not formally, I hadn't studied that, but it seemed to answer maybe some of those really big questions. But if there's a God behind all of this, then it seems he would communicate more about what the purpose is.
Seems
so
logical.
Right. So religion made a lot more sense, and so then I knew enough about Jesus to know, okay, he's the starting point, because most religions point to him in some way or another as an ideal, and with morality being so big. And so I started there and learned enough about Christianity that I thought, okay, this makes sense out of most of the questions I'm asking. And so I would call myself a Christian. I didn't really understand the gospel at that point because I was more moral than even some of the Christians I knew when I was an atheist, probably most of them. I saw Christianity, I think if you would have pressed me, even after I started saying I was a Christian, I think I would have said something along the lines of Christianity teaches that good people go to heaven because they deserve it, and bad people still might have a chance if they kind of put it all on Jesus at the end. But I would have thought good people go because they deserved it. And so through hearing a sermon on the radio that I didn't even know was going to be a sermon. Just kind of started listening at the Scottish accent. It was Alistair Begg. I'm sure you've heard.
Yeah.
Something he said connected with me in a way that I hadn't made a connection before. And I was not part of a church or anything because I thought church was anti-intellectual. They were a bunch of hypocrites. I'd had all these bad examples. So I was going to kind of do it the right way on my own, which was not at all the right way and it can't be done. But anyway, so God, I mean, I think he used where I was though. It wasn't that I was just completely disobedient. It's just that I didn't know. I was ignorant. And so God seemed to reward that, I guess, in continuing to provide what I needed to take that next step and help me along the way. And so, anyway, so I became a Christian. I had largely answered those questions in a really crude fashion on my own that I'd been asking, most of them. And after continuing to listen to this preacher on the radio, one time I left it on after his show, and I heard R.C. Sproul.
Nice.
Who did something on apologetics, which I would have had no clue what that word was at the time. And whatever it was dealing with one of the questions I had been asking, maybe reliability of the Bible. Okay. And I thought, wait a second. So there's answers to this stuff. And then I start peeling back the layers of the onion. And I found there's not just a few, but there's tons and really, really good answers to these questions. It's not even, most of the questions I was asking aren't actually even hard. They're easy. People just don't know. And so my passion then became, how do I help people get connected to the fact that there are answers to these questions? And that's kind of led me to SES. And
I love that story, and it's very similar to mine too, where I was a Christian throughout my 20s, but I was struggling with some of these questions, doubts, whether Christianity was really true or not, and didn't really know where to go to have these conversations, look for these answers, know about resources. And then somebody introduced me to Francis Schaeffer's work.
Okay.
And that's really got me started, and one thing led to another, and I also ended up at Southern Evangelical Seminary, where we both moved there to study apologetics. Yep. Well, with that background then, and the experiences that you went through and God took you through, how has that kind of shaped and led you to start this new ministry that you're doing called Engage 360? What's that about?
Yeah. So I got very into apologetics, really passionate about getting that into the church. And then I started to see these roadblocks that were often coming up. And then as I met more and more people in apologetics, I found out we're all running into the exact same roadblocks. But it seemed like everybody keeps trying to break through the roadblocks the same way, and it doesn't work very often. And we know people who get into apologetics that actually go talk to your average person out in the world today, in the U.S. and the West, anywhere you go, but certainly in the U.S., right? It's changing, I'd say, fairly rapidly. We know you need to know about the answers to these questions. You need to know how to explain your faith in a way more than just your personal testimony. But other people don't know that that's important because they're not really doing it. And so what I became passionate about was, okay, yeah, people need apologetics, but only in as much as it's building up their faith or helping them to share their faith with someone else. And so the way that I think you do that is not by focusing on apologetics, but by focusing on evangelism and discipleship and integrating apologetics naturally into that discussion. Because it is a natural fit once you start doing that. So had been working more primarily apologetics focused in ministry, and then kind of stepped back, re-examined, and with a group of people started this ministry where our focus is actually evangelism training, a little bit discipleship in as much as that fits into the discipleship shell, and then integrating apologetics as a part of that step. And one of the things I'm convinced of is that once you teach people how to go out and have a conversation with their friends, coworkers, neighbors in everyday life, how do they look for opportunities, how do they start the conversation or pivot a conversation, they will run into things where then they might find out that their coworker maybe has a different religious background. And so now they have a reason to learn something about that other religion so that they know how to connect with that person.
Gives them motivation to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So now they might be interested in learning, but a week prior they would have zero interest in learning about that religion. And that's the reality with most people and most Christians, particular, are concerned. But I think the where apologetics has failed is that it almost assumes everybody wants to learn things just to learn, because that's how most apologists are. But that's not how most people are. Most people will learn something when they need to, not because they want to.
Well, just think of the example of you and your life and my life, where we were very greatly motivated to learn these things because we had our own questions.
Right.
And a lot of times it's people aren't motivated until either they have the questions themselves,
Right.
or they're trying to help somebody who has these questions.
Exactly.
And that's where we can try to jump in and try to help them. So
Right.
how, on a street level or just a practical level,
Sure.
how are you bringing this information, these resources and this training to local churches? Because one thing that I'm really excited about in Engage 360 is that their focus is evangelism. You know, what I talk about in Convincing Proof is that I want to start with the gospel. I want to get the gospel out, encourage people to trust in Christ, to be forgiven, reconciled with God, and then bring apologetics to the table when it's necessary if they have questions, objections to the gospel. But the primary thing is to encourage folks to trust in Christ. So tell me about how you do that.
Sure.
Bring apologetics, evangelism together specifically to encourage and strengthen the local church to do that.
Yeah. So we are not a specific evangelism method or an apologetics method. What we're really focused on is more of a mindset and an approach to how do you look for opportunities and capitalize on opportunities to have spiritual conversations in everyday life. And so we, over the past 2 years, has developed a core set of training processes and principles that can be learned through kind of 3 different entry points. So we have in-person training where our team can come and can do that, you know, offer a 1-day intensive. We could do a men's retreat, women's retreat, youth retreat, but we can do our core training anywhere from 1 8-hour day to spread out over a couple of days. We have an online course that we have utilized. We've done 2 groups through, and we're actually going to be revamping that, taking all of the feedback we received and kind of revamping that, and we'll relaunch that at some point in 2021. But our focus in 2020 has ended up being creating a small group curriculum.
Okay.
We had sort of this as a nascent idea maybe a while ago, but COVID-19 and the change that has brought to the world means you're not doing many in-person events.
Yes.
So it sort of accelerated our timeline there. So we now have, and I was sharing with you earlier, we have Adam was actually the first one to see the print of chapter 1. This is just a local print job, but he's the first non-E360 team member to see the nearly finished product. So we've been working on that. So those are the kind of 3 entry points. Again, it's in-person training. We have an online course that individuals could do, relaunching at some point in 2021. And then we have the small group curriculum. We're doing a soft launch this fall and a complete launch in January, roughly January of 2021. So
then a church, or even just a small group at a church, then could take this curriculum that you've developed, and then they can start training their own people, having these conversations.
Correct.
Is that kind of...
Yeah, and what we're doing is, so we wanted to be a balance in that. One of the things that I had seen, a lot of what we see in the apologetics world is traveling events, and then there might be resources. And a lot of what I knew of small group curriculum was that it's maybe a book, and maybe there's videos to supplement. But what we want to do is we recognize that we're pulling people out of their comfort zone and into something they're not as good at and familiar with. When you're asking the average Christian to start sharing their faith in everyday life, they're going to run into things that they don't know how to deal with. And this is not, again, it's not a 4-step gospel presentation method. It's not a 12-step apologetics method. It's saying, here's how you get yourself in, and who knows where it goes from there. So here are some tips you can use generally. And so we have one section where we talk about 3 questions that you can ask in any situation when a challenge is brought up, even if you don't know anything about it. And we teach that, look, there's no fear. In fact, one of the best answers can be, I have no idea how to answer that, but I can go find out. And so what we want to be for small group leaders, for participants in small groups, for churches, for pastors, is an ongoing resource to them. Now that could mean we have some static downloadable resources on our site, on our community site that they could go to. It might mean they go into our forum that we're developing and they can ask a question there. It might mean that they set up a call with one of our team members.
Sure.
But whether it's our team or people that we know or people who we know, I can get an answer to any question that's out there. I can find someone that's been with about any background, any experience. And so I can find an expert if we don't have one on our team. So what we want to do is teach people this mentality and approach that we think is really the biblical approach. What we would argue is that when you look at Acts 2 or Acts 17 or anywhere you see evangelism in the New Testament, they are approaching in a way where they know their audience, either because they previously did or they've learned. They meet their audience on common ground, and then they share Christianity in a way that's going to connect based on that common ground and present the resurrection as the capstone, or as this is how you know it's true. And then there's the call to action of then, it's turn away from your sin, repent, trust in Jesus. But that approach means it's not going to be a 4-step method, because it's not going to work the same every time. Now, you might have a 4-step method to present the gospel once you've gotten there, and that's fine. So we're not saying, you can't do the living waters approach, or you can't do the, whatever other thing you might be exposed to, EvangeCube, or whatever, you might have a way. That's fine. Or the creation, fall, restoration, or redemption, restoration, right?
Some of those.
So some of those are great.
Are just pieces to have in your mind so that you can remember what you're trying to do.
Definitely. But the disconnect, though some people maybe don't know how to present the gospel, and we do cover, here's the core gospel, and here are some ways you can consider. What the bigger chasm is, how do you ever even get in a conversation where you get to the point of sharing the gospel?
How do you start it?
How do you start it? Like, how does that happen? And even in apologetics, if we just think apologetics, I've known plenty of people who got trained in how to answer certain questions, but they have no idea how to get in a normal conversation to where those questions even come up. And so that's our focus, what we're trying to hone in on. But once that's happening, now who knows? It could go anywhere. So we want to be that ongoing resource, kind of growing resources on our community site, growing the connections and relationships, and so being an ongoing source of mentoring, of connection, of networking, of learning. And so we really have a big task ahead of us, and we're going to be sort of a hub for a lot of other things and people to connect into.
Well, I'll tell you what I like about this, several things, but one of the things that I like about Engage 360 here is the community that they want to develop and are developing. So there's resources, community, relationships, and so we can do this as a team, because this is something that no one individual can do.
Right.
But as we work together, that's what the church is supposed to be, us working together with our various gifts to, make disciples, to reach the lost. Another thing that I love about this is the practicality of it. That this isn't, super high level. We need the super high level folks. We need the Alvin Planigas of the world. We need the William Lane Craigs of the world. But we also need folks to break it down and make it very practical, so that we can all be trained in how to share the gospel and do basic apologetics. My last role as a local church pastor was pastor of evangelism. And I used Evangelism Explosion a lot. And just talking to Matt here and learning more about his ministry, it reminds me the most, at least what I've seen out there, of Evangelism Explosion and how they would do that. But what I think Matt and Engage 360 brings to the table beyond Evangelism Explosion, is that they bring the apologetics to the table as well.
Right.
So I'm very excited about what they're doing. And my last question for you is just, how can people get involved? How can people be a part of this?
Sure.
In some way, shape, or form? How can they come alongside or benefit from these resources and community that you're creating?
Yeah, so the easiest way is just go to our website and you can learn what we're doing. We're doing a lot of updates there because we have been making a lot of modifications the last little while. But so you can find out on there. There's a contact page if you want to contact us, set something up, set up a consultation. You may just want to jump in. You may know you're ready to do our small group curriculum, and so there'll be a way that you can jump right into that process on there. So that would be what I would suggest, and just really want to reinforce, this is very entry level. There's no one that this does not fit for. We are starting as shallow as is possible, on the shallow end of the pool, and we can go deeper as time goes on, and we know people that can go a lot deeper as there is need, but we're really serving, and I don't know how well it'll come through, but we've written this curriculum in a way that it's really practical, interactive, fun. It's we've got fun little characters that we've designed. This is not your deep, super intellectual study. However, having said that, it is going to spur a lot of conversation. It's going to get people to think about what have they done, what don't they know how to do, what would they say, what would come out if they tried to just share the gospel, getting them So it's certainly not passive, but it's very entry level. And we did have one group that was our kind of piloting as we were developing some of the curriculum. They were taking a very crude form, and they said that typically their group was dominated by 2 individuals, and everyone else, once they got going, was mostly silent. And they said that this, more than anything they've ever used, everyone was talking. Good. Every session. They were all interacting. Everyone had something to share. They would start debating about how they should respond to something, you know. So we had present scenarios and say, how would you respond? So there were debates about, should you respond this way, or, well, what about this? And they said it really drew everybody out because it was practical, everyday stuff. It wasn't disconnected. Yeah. And so that's really what we're going for. And hopefully, over time, we'll even be able to refine it more as we get feedback and continue to improve.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, yeah, and this is Matt Schmidt, and he's telling us about his ministry, Engage 360, and I'm very excited about it. I would encourage you to check it out and benefit from the resources in the community that they're developing. One thing that I love about Matt is his heart of serving others, and that's how, you know, I view my own ministry, Convincing Proof, is that we want to serve others with the gifts and ability that God has given us. So thanks for being a part of this, Matt, and letting us
and I'll give you a link
to
put in the bio or put in the description of our website if they want. It's www.e360m.org. So that's E as in evangelism, and then at the end M as in ministry. So e360m.org, but you can put that in.
We'll put that in the links down below. All right, thanks again so much, Matt.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you having me.